of today, but there's always a few exceptions to the rule. There will be a little more cloud across Scotland, parts of the northeast of England, and maybe the odd sharper shower here too. An improving picture though to the south, where the remnants of a weather front brought us quite a grey and wet start. The southeast moving into sunshine for the afternoon. Some thickening cloud though through the second part of the day for the southwest of England and for South Wales. Quite a nagging northerly breeze feeding the cloud into northern Scotland and into our North Sea coast. So just 14 degrees in Aberdeen, quite a chilly 15 in Newcastle. Chance of the odd shower, as I said, for northern Scotland. Also across the Pennines through the afternoon, maybe the odd sharper one. Could see one or two just drifting into Lincolnshire and Norfolk as we move through the evening. Overnight, a fine story, however, and with clear skies across Scotland, it could actually turn pretty chilly in some of the glens to the north, lows of just 2 or 3 degrees, low enough for a grass frost. Monday dawns fine and clear for the majority, and there'll be plenty of sunshine around through the day, more widespread, if anything, than today. But come the afternoon, we will see cloud thickening for Northern Ireland as a warm front starts to move in, and then some rain by the evening. Temperatures for Monday, well, average values basically. We're looking at 16 in Aberdeen, warmer in Newcastle up to 17, 21, 22 to the south. We should have a fine day for Wimbledon on Monday with some pleasant spells of sunshine, and courtside should feel pretty comfortable, highs of 20 or 21 degrees. Later on in the week, though, there's an increasing chance of seeing some disruption to play. Tuesday, I think any rain, though, will stay to the north as this front just tips in. High pressure hangs on in there to the south. Greyer prospects for Northern Ireland with some rain, and then the rain moving into Scotland and northern England. To the south, in the best of any brightness, perhaps 23 degrees further north. And again, we're looking at the mid-teens, perhaps some heavier rain for a time across the central belt of Scotland. And then on to our outlook. Through the middle of the week, quite unsettled across the northern half of the UK. And then Friday, fairly widespread showers are possible with some real humdingers in the mix. So that, as I said, could bring some disruption to Wimbledon.
You will make the world a stronger, fairer, wiser place.
Our children would have the means to rise and claim parity with their richer fellows.
If your own country betrays you, to whom do you then owe loyalty?
Risk it all one last time. Poldark, the final series, starts next Sunday at 9 on BBC One.
No matter what I'm juggling, I still want to feed my family delicious food.
No, you want to eat that.
I'm going to show you how to make amazing, stress-free recipes.
Together we'll do it.
Using my cheeky, time-saving hacks. Life's too short. Enjoy your family and enjoy your time.
So yummy.
Now, if you don't mind, could you leave me with my bowl?
Join us for Nadia's Time to Eat. Starts Monday, 15th of July on BBC Two and BBC iPlayer.
Will the USA be able to lift the trophy like they did in 2015? See them play the Netherlands today at 3:30 for the Women's World Cup final. Right now on BBC One, we join Andrew Marr.
Good morning. First thing to remember, nobody knows anything. But that said, there seems to be growing momentum behind Boris Johnson's campaign to be our next Prime Minister and to take us out of the EU by the end of October. Second thing, however, the likelihood of a general election in the coming months now feels very high. And with 5 parties all competing seriously, there is literally nobody in politics who has the faintest clue about where we're really heading. Keep watching, folks. John McDonnell thinks he will be the first ever socialist Labour Chancellor in British history, and soon. What does that mean for you? Even as shares in Johnson keep rising, there are cabinet members determined to stop a no-deal Brexit, and one of the most outspoken is the Justice Secretary, David Gauke. And at the epicentre of the dramatic new row between Britain and China over Hong Kong, I'm joined for an exclusive interview by the Ambassador of the People's Republic of China, Liu Xiaoming. Plus, a sensational musical star, Isata Kano Mason, is here to play Clara Schumann. Reviewing the news, Helen Lewis from The Atlantic, the executive editor of Conservative Home, Mark Wallace, and we've borrowed the political editor of Sky News as well. Beth Rigby is here. All of that coming up soon, but first the news with Victoria Fritz.
Good morning. President Trump's White House has been described as uniquely dysfunctional and inept in leaked memos from the UK's ambassador in Washington. Sir Kim Darroch's private communications, which were obtained by the Mail on Sunday, described Mr. Trump's administration as insecure and incompetent. The Foreign Office says strong relations with the White House would not be damaged by the mischievous leak of memos, but did not deny their accuracy. Iran has announced it will break a limit agreed with other countries in 2015 on its production of enriched uranium, which can be used to make fuel for reactors, but also for nuclear weapons. Iran said it still wanted to salvage the deal agreed 4 years ago, but blamed European countries for failing to live up to their own commitments. The US withdrew from the agreement in 2018 and has since reimposed strict sanctions on Iran. The Department of Health and Social Care plans to spend £3 million on no-deal Brexit measures to transport medication. It wants to hire an express freight service to transport medicines, blood and transplant tissue. Experts have described the timeline for the contract as tight, but the government says it's being done within the usual guidelines. Now, voters in Greece are electing a new parliament, with the left-wing government facing a strong challenge from the Conservative opposition. It is the 6th general election in Greece since the financial crisis a decade ago, which triggered a series of bailouts. The governing party has been criticised for agreeing to tough austerity measures after previously promising to oppose them. And the United States are aiming to lift the Women's World Cup for a 4th time today when they face the Netherlands in the final. If the Americans succeed, they will become the 2nd team to win the competition back-to-back. The Netherlands are the reigning women's European champions and are unbeaten in their last 10 games. You can catch all the action from 3:30 this afternoon on BBC One. That is it from me. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Andrew.
Many thanks, and I will almost certainly be watching, Victoria. So the Sunday paper front pages as usual. I mentioned right at the beginning there's a sense of the Boris Johnson ascendancy about to land on top of us, and that's very much picked up by the papers. Britain will boom under Boris, says the Sunday Express. The Sunday Telegraph, another very pro-Boris Johnson paper. I'm not bluffing on no deal, warns Boris Johnson. The Sunday Times focuses on the civil war, which it says is ripping apart Jeremy Corbyn's team. We'll talk about that with John McDonnell later on, but also has Sajid Javid backing Boris and hoping to be his Chancellor of the Exchequer. Everyone is jockeying for jobs at the moment. Not me. And Mail on Sunday has another story, a very important story here. They've got leaked diplomatic cables in which the language is relatively undiplomatic about Donald Trump, saying that he's inept and unself-confident. That probably means that we're going to have a new ambassador in Washington before too long. And so where are we going to start? Beth, let's start with you. And as I said, one of the big stories is the division inside the Labour Party at the top. True or not, lots of people have been talking to the Sunday Times.
Yes, that's right, Andrew. And if you think about what's happened with Labour over the past 3 years, Jeremy Corbyn was against his MPs, or they against he, and he won that battle. And then he's always had the support of the membership. But what is changing and what is very worrying for him is whether or not there is now beginning to be a split in his core support within the party. We know lots of the MPs don't like him, but this story is suggesting that now John McDonnell, his key ally, the Shadow Chancellor, and Diane Abbott are now beginning to turn against others in his camp, his unelected political aides, which is Carrie Murphy as Chief of Staff, Seamus Milne.
They have already denied this, of course, but it must be very unsettling to wonder who in your inner team is talking to the press.
I mean, they have denied it, but I spoke to a Shadow Cabinet Minister just this weekend who said to me that John McDonnell is really unhappy at the moment, and that actually, while to the world they might deny it, there are definite problems in terms of a split between what Jeremy Corbyn wants to do on Brexit and what the party do. And what I think the key thing in this piece is this quote about Abbott. Diane Abbott says, she's furious that Murphy and Milne have driven a wedge between Corbyn and his base by preventing him from backing a new referendum. She's told friends they are keeping him captive. And if you think about it, Jeremy Corbyn sits at the top of the Labour Party, not because he's got the support of MPs, but because he's got the base of the party. And when they look at the polls and they look at
members,
and they look at 18% in the polls, they might just be beginning to think, is the shine going away from Corbyn, and do we need to change the leader?
It's certainly a very, very tricky time for them. John McDonnell keeps coming up with more and more radical policies to excite people, however. And there's a scoop in the Manchester Evening News, I think.
Right, and this is the Power Up the North campaign, which was supported by, I think, more than 30 local newspapers across the North, basically saying that we need more money, we need infrastructure spending. I think John McDonnell's slightly enjoying himself now that the spending taps look like they're being turned on. Both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt have said, yeah, well, actually, we're going to spend this no-deal fund, we're going to see some investment. And so he's able to go, well, look, actually, you know, I am a moderate fiscally. I only want to spend a bit of money. They also want to spend money. That old kind of George Osborne dividing line is gone. So he wants to break up Number 11, the Treasury, move bits of it to the north. I mean, this is something that actually everybody in British politics has known for a long time. You know, George Osborne had his northern powerhouse. There is a huge problem about the fact that transport links, particularly within the north, trying to get from one of the great northern cities to another, is incredibly hard. And that has its problems for businesses, because actually if your workers can't get around, it's very hard to recruit.
Mark Wallace, Conservative perspective, you understand as a party the north is really important. That's going to be one of the key battlegrounds in the forthcoming general election. You had the Northern Powerhouse as a George Osborne slogan, and now John McDonnell seems to be grabbing that and running with it.
Indeed, and this has been a huge focus, particularly, of course, since Brexit, since the EU referendum actually opened up a lot of voters who perhaps had lost their past ties with, traditionally say, the Labour Party. You see the Conservatives have been able to gain ground in the Tees Valley, where they control the mayoralty. A whole series of seats there, like Bishop Auckland, which are now much more marginal than they once were. They're the kind of seats the Conservative Party has to try to pick up. And in 2017, Theresa May tried to pivot towards some of those voters and away from some of her more traditional voters, and managed to fall between the two, which is kind of what went wrong.
Do you think that we are heading for an election in September or October?
I mean, it certainly seems likely for two reasons. One, the arithmetic in Parliament's not going to change, although the Prime Minister will. But the other is that the parties themselves are gearing up on this kind of footing. You see this total war within the Labour Party. We also see this peculiar scene in the Mail on Sunday, for example, of Jeremy Corbyn out in the park doing a lot more exercise than you'll normally catch me doing. But it's actually quite a president.
Show people that he is not frail, that he is strong and fit. You know, these rumours about a stroke and stuff are absolute nonsense, and that he's up for it.
Yeah. It's a kind of presidential style of politics almost. You see this in Australia, where people infamously go jogging in their budgie smugglers. But even this story comes into this internal war within the kind of personality cult of Corbyn. The allegation in the Mail on Sunday that Damien McBride, an advisor to Emily Thornberry, it is alleged by Corbyn allies, might even have been behind these leaks against casting doubt on Corbyn's health.
Once it gets internal, it gets very, very nasty indeed. Now, Beth, you actually know this outdoor gym, don't you?
Yeah, I actually sometimes go there because it's in Finsbury Park near where I live, and it's a small outdoor gym, and it's used by the local community. And I have heard that Jeremy Corbyn does go news. I haven't stalked him. I don't go and hang out trying to just catch a word with the Labour leader. But I have heard that he does go to that gym. But these look to me like they are, you know, staged photographs.
No,
surely not.
I think next to saying that photo of Boris Johnson and his girlfriend was staged. I don't believe it.
Helen, let's turn. You mentioned the words Boris Johnson.
I did.
Let's turn to the Observer, which is a big spread about what they also think is the coming victory of Boris Johnson.
Right, so the ballot papers have gone out and they're starting to come back in. And my favourite bit about this is the Conservative supportive press trying to kind of tap dance around Boris Johnson's long record of upsetting people. You know, sacked by the Times for making up a quote, a paper that has now endorsed him, sacked from the shadow cabinet for lying. And so everybody has to do this thing where they kind of recount his CV and say, no, the reason is that all this stuff means that he's the perfect man to negotiate in Brussels. And it kind of reminds me of kind of, I don't know, saying like, this is Hannibal Lecter's CV, and because he eats people, this is exactly the reason he should run the prison canteen. We need somebody who can be jazzy, and you know, if he's lied a couple of times, so what? I just find it very, very funny in a time that is not otherwise very funny.
For all of those people watching for blooper after blooper after blooper, Johnson has gone through these hustings relatively disciplined and relatively on message.
Indeed, of course, he had a particularly bad time at the start of this party membership stage with kind of various allegations and revelations in the press. But one of the peculiar things is that actually what's happened is that people used to, I think, say, have quite a heart, kind of love feeling about Boris Johnson back in his mayoral campaign. They liked the kind of tone around him, and if they had any doubts, they were more about the political effect. Now that's almost flipped, and people are backing him because they believe he is the person who can change the political weather and can achieve a very particular goal, which is defeating Jeremy Corbyn and delivering Brexit.
The only thing I would say about that, though, is that in his mayoral days he was like the Heineken politician, in which he could reach parts of the electorate that other Conservatives can't. And going around the country as well and watching some of the hustings, he is very Marmite now. So if you believe in Boris Johnson, you really love him. But a lot of people who are very unhappy about Brexit associate Vote Leave and that success with him, and so he really turns off a lot of the electorate. So when he says, I can unify the country and the party, it's going to be really interesting if he does get into number 10, which is what it looks like, how in practice he actually does that, and whether he tacks away from this very hard language on Brexit and does start moving back towards the centre ground.
And in that sense, that's because the country is now a 4-way, possibly 5-way marginal, if it were to be one constituency. And there was a little bit of this when you saw the Rory Stewart kind of fan base develop. The idea that, well, actually, lots of people we speak to who are Lib Dems and Labour supporters really like him. There's a difference between a floating voter who might consider voting for you and somebody who would never consider voting for you, but who might like you.
Let's turn to another big story, which is the ambassador in Washington is having a beastly day, I would imagine, because his quite frank memos, they're not perhaps surprising memos about the realities of the Trump administration, sent back to Mark Sedwill in the Cabinet Office, have now been leaked to Isabel Oakeshott in the Mail on Sunday.
Yes, cracking story, this one, and massive problems for Sir Kim Darroch, the US ambassador, in which, as you said, an ambassador's job is, of course, to caress whichever leader they're working with to their face, but then pass back what really they think in private, crucially in private. And these have been leaked, and just a few of them. I don't think this administration will ever look competent for a man who's risen to the highest office on the planet. President Trump radiates insecurity. Now, we know that President Trump doesn't much like people being rude about him. I imagine this will really irritate him. What's going on? An attempt to perhaps unseat our current US ambassador as we look towards potentially a Boris Johnson premiership.
And we also read, I think in the Sunday Times, that one of the first things that Boris Johnson plans to do if he wins this is to go to Washington to meet President Trump, where the future of this ambassador and the future of the next British ambassador may or may not be discussed.
I think it's fascinating to come on to the Hong Kong story. This is a kind of an era of big power politics again, right? So our relationship in the post-EU, post-Brexit world with America is going to be crucial in terms of trade deals. Again, also with China. So these protests in Hong Kong have been happening now on and off for years, but particularly intensified since the 1st of July, which is the anniversary of the handover. In 1997, it was guaranteed that Hong Kong would have some measure of independence for 50 years. But activists say that's being eroded. There is now a law that would allow you to extradite people to mainland China, which is seen as a kind of crackdown on democracy. And they show no signs really of bubbling down. We've summoned the Chinese ambassador for a thorough dressing down. I think that's the approved phrase. But realistically, although Jeremy Hunt has warned of serious consequences, there is very little we can do. And again, post-Brexit, this is a country that we will be looking to trade with.
So it can be very, very difficult for us. In the world of diplomacy, the most undiplomatic moment, I guess, recently was the turning of the backs of the Brexit party on Beethoven's Ode to Joy in the European Parliament. And there is a truly bizarre story that this has started a kind of anti-Beethoven's Ninth campaign around the country.
Well, it remains to be seen if it's the most undiplomatic moment. We'll probably hear the Chinese ambassador in a minute tell us there's not a problem in Hong Kong, no problem with the Uyghurs, etc., etc. So he might yet take that record. But there's this kind of silly aspect to this culture war. I can't see who it is who they claim is now complaining about the idea of the Three Choirs Festival performing Ode to Joy. Most Eurosceptics don't like the EU. They don't like the lack of democracy. They don't like the fact we can't control our own money, our laws and our borders. They're not so bothered about Beethoven. And Brussels and Jean-Claude Juncker, they don't own Beethoven. They're trying to ride on his coattails.
Well, we'll have no Beethoven, but we have some Schumann, Clara Schumann, coming up later on. Thanks to all of you very much indeed. And so to the weather. It was almost too hot last week. It won't be next week. Susan Powell has more details.
Thanks. You've given the game away. Distinctly average temperatures for the week ahead. We've all moved into some fresher air. Still got 26 yesterday in Hampshire. Looking pretty cloudy, though, in Hastings at the moment and for many southern counties of England as this line of cloud sits in place. That's the cold weather front, and it's behind that the fresher air will sit across all parts for the UK today. So yesterday, after that 26 degrees, we're looking at 21, 22 to the south, but brightening skies as the hours go by now. Quite a bit of cloud, though, being fed in on the northerly breeze to northern and eastern Scotland and the northeast of England, keeping things quite cool here. Could be some showers for northern Scotland out of that cloud on and off through the day, eastern Scotland and parts of northern England, the Pennines possibly getting the odd sharper one. A couple perhaps just drifting into Lincolnshire, parts of East Anglia through the evening and overnight. But as you can see, we're talking about a lot of dry weather. Overnight, it turns quite chilly in some of the Scottish glens, lows of 2 and 3 degrees. Certainly much fresher to the south of the UK for first thing Monday. But the week dawns with a lot of promise. Plenty of sunshine, plenty of fine weather on Monday, but thicker cloud will bring rain into Northern Ireland by the afternoon. But there you are with your average temperatures. 17 in Aberdeen, 22 on Monday, high in the southeast of England.
Very many thanks. Now, most diplomatic arguments are restrained, muttering affairs. Not so the row going on between Britain and China over protests in Hong Kong about a new extradition bill. We were just talking about it. Many people there feel it will shred their human rights. Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, sympathised with the protesters. The Chinese ambassador then held a rather rare press conference in which he angrily condemned the UK government for interfering in their internal affairs. He is with me now for his first interview since then. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. You were quite angry, weren't you?
Yes, very much so, because we are strongly opposed to British intervention in Hong Kong internal affairs. We believe that this amendment ordinance has a good reason, because the chief executive and the Hong Kong government want to make Hong Kong a better place, safer place, rather than a safe haven for fugitive criminals. But yes, yet the British government, senior officials, voice support for demonstrators. What makes it even worse is when the violence happened, they even voice support. Instead of condemning the storming of the Legislation Council, they criticize the Hong Kong government for handling the situation.
Jeremy Hunt just said his heart went out to the protesters and he didn't approve of the violence. Now, a lot of people thought there was a kind of 50-year guarantee that not much would change in Hong Kong when the handover happened, and that this is being eroded by this new law, because once you can extradite somebody very easily from Hong Kong to the mainland, then lots of people will stop saying what they would have said, free speech will be slowly silenced, and people do feel that this is the beginning of the end of the one country, two systems agreement.
Andrew, so that shows your lack of understanding of what this bill is about. It's not about extradite the people from Hong Kong to mainland. It's about, Hong Kong has this mutual assistance agreement with 30 countries, yet they do not have the similar agreement with more than 170 countries and regions. So that is means if some people committed crime outside Hong Kong and return to Hong Kong, Hong Kong cannot punish them. And this bill will make it to plug the loopholes. I think some people try to use this to scare fear among the Hong Kong people. In the past...
these are powers that Beijing wants.
I don't think so.
No?
The whole thing started by Hong Kong government. Just as a chief executive said, he received no instructions from Beijing. He received no order from Beijing. It is a completely initiative, launched by Hong Kong government to make a Hong Kong system more perfect, to improve the legal system.
We've seen all the scenes in Legco and in Hong Kong recently, and there seemed to be the case that the police there couldn't hold back the protesters. If you feel the situation is getting out of control and the Hong Kong authorities can't control things, does Beijing, does China intervene directly in Hong Kong?
You mentioned about the one country, two systems.
Yes.
For 50 years. We are fully committed to this agreement. There's no question about that. So you can see that from the day one till now, central government have not interfered at all. We, on every step of the way, we let the Hong Kong government to handle this.
Yes.
Instead, it is the British government try to interfere, voice support for demonstrators. Then when these writers stormed the Legico, they even said you can't use this violence as a protest for repression. So, they try to obstruct the legal process. And answer your question in a simple way, we have a full confidence in Hong Kong government
to do that.
And it shows that they are capable of handling this situation.
Nevertheless, this law would make it easier to extradite people to China. Chris Patten, mainland China, who was the last governor, said this recently. He said, things have gone from bad to very bad to even worse. People with the wrong views have been banned from political activity. Freedom of speech has been whittled away in the media and in the universities. Beijing has even abducted individuals from Hong Kong and taken them back to the mainland.
I totally reject accusation of Chris Patten. I think as a last governor of Hong Kong, his body is in the 21st century, but his head is still living in the old colonial days. It won't make easy, with this bill to extradite people from Hong Kong to China, mainland China, because there's many safeguards. First of all, there's 37 clause to safeguard the in terms of this bill. That means no people will be extradited to China because of religious belief, because of the political belief, and it has to be punishable. The crime has to be punishable on both places. That means even some make an extreme case. If the murder is not regarded as a crime in Hong Kong, then people who committed murder will not be extradited to China.
This has been a very, very angry row by diplomatic standards. Jeremy Hunt is still threatening further, possibly sanctions and so forth against China if it goes on. Is this a moment when British-Chinese relationships are in real crisis?
I don't think so. I don't think so. We are not interested in diplomatic war with the UK. We are still committed in building stronger relationship, partnership. The golden era started by President Xi. I still remember the last time you interviewed me was before President Xi's visit in 2015. Yes. And we are still committed to this golden era between our two countries. But I cannot agree with some politicians' description of the relationship. Even they use this so-called strategic ambiguity. I think this language does not belong to the vocabulary between China and UK. It's a Cold War mentality language.
Another big row between Britain and China potentially is over the role of Huawei in the 5G electronic communications network. Can I put it to you, there is no way at all the People's Republic of China would allow Western or British or American companies direct access to your security infrastructure?
China is developing, and to answer your question directly, I don't think Huawei would have access to your security infrastructure.
Huawei will be able to eavesdrop on lots of aspects of British life, and the law currently says that it is obliged to hand over information the Chinese government wants, and that's what scares people.
No, it will not happen at all. First of all, no backdoor, and also there's a lot of safeguards.
Can you promise people on this program, and if Huawei has complete access to our 5G network, information will not be passed back to the government in Beijing by Huawei?
I can promise that, 100%. And I think Huawei is a good company, is a leader of 5G. I think if you reject Huawei, you will miss enormous opportunities. I think they are here for win-win cooperation. They are not here to spy people.
All right, let's turn to another big element of difficulties between the countries, which is the treatment of the Uyghur people in northwest China. Now, there's camps all across that part of China. Up to 1 million people, according to the United Nations, have been interned in these camps, and the BBC has reported on the separation of children from their families going into camps for children. What is going on?
I think they have made a distorted picture of what is going on in Xinjiang. You know, Xinjiang is relatively poor area in China. In terms of GDP, it ranked about 26 in the whole country. There are 37 provinces. So in the past, since 1990s, Xinjiang has been severely hit by the terrorism, separatism, extremists. Just 10 years ago, 2 days ago, on the 5th of July, there's a very serious terrorist incident happened. 197 people got killed.
But
so the government...
Sorry, can I just put it to you that internment camps are not the answer? We tried them in Northern Ireland and it didn't go well for Britain in Northern Ireland. And these are camps with, you know, razor wire around them. People can't leave them.
This is not a camp. What we call it, it's a vocational education and training center. You know, the extremist ideas will have an easy penetration to the poor area. So the idea is to have people, to lift them out of poverty.
If these camps are only about that, if they're so innocent, why did the Chinese government deny for so long that they existed?
No, we didn't deny. We even invited journalists, diplomats to visit, including, so
Only
that's why
recently.
your BBC has access, you know, to interview people over there. I think you need to look at this from the positive perspective, is for the purpose to prevent early prevention of terrorism. And since the measure been introduced, there is no terrorist incident for 3 years.
But nonetheless, these are quite difficult areas, these camps. They are internment camps. People can't leave them, can they? Once they're in, they're not able to leave.
They can go. They can leave freely, of course. They can visit their relatives. You know, it's not a prison. It's not a camp.
The BBC talked to some of the parents of Uyghur children who are now in Turkey, and they're really upset about the fact that they have been separated from their children and they don't know where they are. I can show you a little clip of it so we can hear what they say.
Bunlar hemmisi hazır yok. Kardeşim yok. Sınırımın yoldaşı yok. Sınırımın oğlu yok. Benim oğlum yok. Bizim suçumuz ne?
Do you know where your children are now?
Ballarımın dikenliğine kampıda dedi, Mağlı kampıda dedi.
So where are those children?
These people, let's first talk about these people. You know, these people are anti-government people. You cannot expect a good word about the government. The children, you know, the government take good care of children. Well, you know, in Xinjiang...
Are they separating forcibly parents from their children in Xinjiang?
No. If they want to visit their children, they can come back to China.
This is all just lies, is it?
Yes, definitely. There's no separation of children from their parents, not at all.
Well, the BBC's been to one town in the province where, in just one town, 400 families lost their children.
You just give me the names of the family who lost their children. You know, there's many misinformation about people got missing. You know, we handle the case. You know, many cases like this, you know, some country said a musician got killed, then other day a musician emerged alive and happy. And if you have people got their children lost, you give me names and we try to locate them and let you know who they are, what they're doing.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. My next guest is a man at the end of his tether. The Justice Secretary, David Gauke, this week attacked populist politicians who he said are pouring poison into our national conversation. He's also been working behind the scenes to try to stop a no-deal Brexit, and he's with me now. Before we get on to all of that, David Gauke, you are the Justice Secretary. You've heard the Ambassador there. Do you accept there are no such internment camps in China?
Well, I'm not in a position to comment on that, although you presented evidence in your interview. I think the basic point I would make in terms of your interview is that we believe the basic freedoms in Hong Kong must be respected. That is something where we have standing because of the joint declaration, and that is why Jeremy Hunt has been making the comments that he's been making.
Populist politicians dripping poison into the national conversation. Who are you thinking about?
I'm making a general point that it is, at the moment, the public discourse is, I think, particularly rancorous. We see lots of comments about people engaged in betrayal or traitors and so on, and I think we need to move away from that. I also think that we need to have a political debate that is open about the fact that all the choices in front of us in terms of the big issue of Brexit have significant consequences, and we should be open about that, and we should be honest and be straight with the British people as to what our choices are and what the consequences are involved.
Do you think the two candidates in your leadership contest are being straight with people?
Well, I think there's a challenge for all of us to be straightforward about what particular courses of action.
Yes or a no?
Well, I think let me take the issue of leaving without a deal.
Yeah.
I think there are very significant downsides for the UK if we leave without a deal. I think there's a lot of talk about we need to prepare for no deal. Well, one of the things that we would need to do is prepare the British people for the realities of no deal. And I don't think all of my colleagues have been perhaps as candid about that as they might have been.
Now, you've said that Parliament can stop no deal happening. And I put it to you that's not necessarily true, that Parliament's running out of options. Oliver Letwin has looked at this in great detail and said there is no way really that Parliament, he thinks, can stop no deal. The Institute of Government, highly respected, says much the same thing. And if the government doesn't bring through legislation which can be amended to stop no deal, it's hard to see how Parliament can intervene.
Well, you mentioned the Institute of Government. What they also say is, they start with, unless the Speaker is prepared to allow some form of innovation, then it's very hard to see.
So you're putting all your trust on John Bercow?
Well, look, I think the sense is, what I've said is that if I was asked to speculate on this, given where the parliamentary majority is and the strength of feeling on a no-deal Brexit, is that I think there probably will be a parliamentary way in which this can be stopped. I agree there's an element of uncertainty. There is an element of uncertainty about it, but I think the likelihood is that Parliament will find a mechanism somehow between now and the 31st of October.
We read about the so-called Gwokwood squad of MPs, 20 or 30 MPs, meeting with the Chancellor and other MPs to stop no deal happening. Are you a member of that? Have those meetings happened?
Well, I'm not going to get into private meetings, but what I would say is that there are a sizable number of Conservative members of Parliament who, like me, believe that we should leave the European Union, but we believe we should leave the European Union with a deal. And there are a sizable number of us who are meeting, having conversations at all times, as you would expect.
Now, from the point of view of Boris Johnson, he confronts this Parliament with virtually no majority. He listens to people like you who are against no deal, and certainly proroguing Parliament, locking Parliament is obviously a very unattractive option. One way round all of that would be for the winner of this contest to call an election, perhaps in early September, and go to the country, if you listen to Boris Johnson, possibly advertising no deal as his preferred outcome there. What does it do to the Tory party if you're going to have an election in September and no deal is going to be part of the agenda?
Well, I think, first of all, having a general election before we have left the European Union, before we've resolved this issue, I think would be extremely difficult for the Conservative Party. Whatever you say, I think there's a risk of being squeezed from both sides, as we saw in the European parliamentary elections, from the Brexit Party on one side, the Liberal Democrats on another. But if the proposal is that we fight a general election as essentially the Brexit Party, I think that would be extremely difficult for the Conservative Party, because we succeed when we are a broad church. And if we were to become essentially another version of the Brexit Party, we would put a ceiling on our support that would make it very, very difficult for us to ever win a parliamentary majority. I think we would find ourselves on the wrong side of this issue. And in large parts of the country that have traditionally voted Conservative, I don't think there's great appetite for that type of Conservative Party.
Right now, 160,000 people are filling out their ballot papers and sending them back to the Conservative Party. Are you convinced they are all proper Conservatives?
Well, they're all party members. I think what you're getting at is the issue of, has there been some element of entryism within the Conservative Party? My own view, and I've had a little bit of experience of this within my own constituency, is that there are clearly people who are supporters of the Brexit Party that have joined the Conservative Party.
You had somebody, I think, who said he wanted to be the Brexit Party's candidate at the next election, and was inside your party and voted in the contest and then left again.
Yes, and I think he was about to be thrown out of the party, but I think he may have resigned just before that happens. But I think we ought to put this in some kind of context. This is relatively small scale. So there was a lot of talk from Leave.eu that they were trying to infiltrate my party and so on. I think the evidence suggests that they found about 30 people that joined my local association who could potentially be described as falling within that category. That's out of a membership of around about 600. So I think there's an element of it, but one shouldn't overstate it.
Meanwhile, we're getting lots of new proposals from the candidates about what they would do as Prime Minister. One of the things that Boris Johnson has said is that serious criminals, people who've been convicted of murder and other serious offences, should serve their full time in prison. Judges should not have the ability to commute to those sentences. Do you think that, as Justice Secretary, that is a sensible proposal?
Well, I think what he is proposing is, if you like, honesty in sentencing, so that if you get 10 years, you serve 10 years. A couple of things I would say on that. One is, in terms of the system that's been in place for a long time, we have automatic release at halfway for most prisoners, but then they're under licence for the second half. That is an approach by which we can, if you like, manage people back into society, and if they misbehave, they can be recalled. The second point I would make, for the more serious offenders, which I think was what Boris Johnson was talking about, we do have these extended determinate sentences. So in fact, they serve 2/3 of their sentence, and then the parole board makes a judgment as to whether they should be released or not. And it is worth bearing in mind that for serious offenders, sentences have grown very significantly in the last few years. For sexual offences, they've gone up by, I think, something like 25% in the last 9 years. Overall, we have a more punitive
It doesn't
system
sound to
than
me
was
like
the
you
past.
think this is a good idea.
Well,
you've already got all the tools you need.
I think serious offenders should get serious sentences, but it's worth bearing in mind we've moved in that direction. And let's remember, in 1993 we had 44,000 people in prison. 15 years later it was 84,000. Our prison population is large by historic and international standards.
He's going to sack you, isn't he?
Well, I suspect that I will possibly have gone before then.
Really?
If Boris's position, assuming that he wins, if Boris's position is that he is going to require every member of the cabinet to sign up to being prepared to leave without a deal on the 31st of October, to be fair to him, I can't support that policy, so I would resign in advance.
One other job-related question. You've seen the papers this morning. Sir Kim Darroch's messages from Washington back to the government in London have been leaked to the Mail on Sunday. Do you think in those circumstances, and given what he said, he can keep his job as ambassador?
I think it's very important that ambassadors give honest, unvarnished advice to their country, and it is disgraceful that it's been leaked. But we should expect our ambassadors to tell the truth as they see it.
And therefore the government should stick by him.
Well, as I say, I think ambassadors need to be able to make their honest assessment of the situation, report back to London, and that is what he's done.
David Gauke, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Now then, when the pianist Eyster Canna-Mason was here last time, she said her dream was to play New York's Carnegie Hall. Well, since then, she's been booked to play just there. She's brought out her debut album, Romance. It's a recording of works by the great 19th century composer and performer Clara Schumann. I spoke to her a little bit earlier and asked if she had any nerves about playing at Carnegie Hall.
I get nervous for every concert actually, but I think that's a good thing, otherwise you'd start taking it for granted. The bigger the concert hall, definitely the more adrenaline I have, but I like having adrenaline.
Now you've got your first album coming out, an exciting moment, and you focused it entirely on Clara Schumann. Just tell us why.
So Clara Schumann, well, first of all, this is the 200th year anniversary of Clara Schumann's birth. So it felt like a great time to get her music out there more. It's not played much, and I think she's an amazing woman. She has a lot of strength, and she wrote a lot of beautiful music which isn't heard.
A great young romantic composer, and she was performing herself at a ridiculously early age, even earlier than you, I think.
Yes, I think she did her first performance when she was about 6 or something, and she was a virtuosic concert pianist throughout her life.
And composing from very young as well. Just tell us a little bit about what you're going to be playing for us later on.
Well, later I'll be playing her second scherzo in C minor, which she wrote when she was in her 20s, but she started composing from childhood. I mean, she composed a concerto when she was about 14, for example.
So you have to get to the stage when she's not simply the other Schumann.
Yes, exactly. People always know Robert Schuman and Clara Schuman's always secondary, but she should be as equals, I think.
Well, we're looking forward to it very much. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
2 summers ago, we just had a general election and Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party had surprised everybody, 40% of the vote and ripping away the Tory majority. Mr Corbyn was greeted as a hero in Glastonbury, Corbyn mania was at full flood, and today it doesn't feel quite that way. One poll this week had Labour coming 4th on just 18%. This morning's papers, as we heard earlier on, are full of stories about deep splits at the top of the Labour Party. The Shadow Chancellor is here. What's gone wrong, John McDonnell?
You've been reading the wrong newspapers, I think.
I've been reading all the newspapers, and they're all pretty much the same.
No, not at all. On the polls, the recent polls in today's, we're ahead of the Tories. It's neck and neck, I accept that. But it was before the last election. We were miles behind before the last election, and then we drew level and almost won.
But
anyway,
45 down to an average of 25. That's a huge drop.
Brexit has dominated everything, and once we get through that, I think we're back into the domestic agenda, and I think we'll win on that basis.
Once we get through that, how much do you think the Labour Party's apparent equivocation on Brexit has damaged you with your core voters?
I think it's been difficult to explain to people the sort of process we've gone through, because what we've tried to do, because you interviewed me before about this, we tried the most difficult task, which is to bring everyone together again, achieve what I used to call a British, a very British compromise. Actually, that's not worked, and what's happened now is the middle ground has gone, and it's gone to either extreme of either remain or leave. And I think we've got, now the debate in the party is that if we can't get a deal that will protect jobs and the economy through Parliament, we've got to go back to the people. And the issue is, of course we want a general election, and that might happen. I agree with you. I think Boris might call one in September. But if not, of course, a referendum.
Now, Tom Watson, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, has been promoting a kind of sign-up referendum motion. I've got it on the screen there, I think. And what he says in this is, as the party, this is a Labour Remain declaration, as the party of Remain, we will not take every voter with us, but it's the only way that Labour can win. The next step needs to be a public vote on the Brexit fiasco, with Labour leading the way for Remain. Is there a syllable there you could disagree with?
Not an awful lot. I think Tom's expressed his view. What I've said is, Jeremy has made it clear we're going to go back to the people, and he said in a referendum as well. I've said in the discussions, when people have asked me what's your position, I said, well, actually we have to be straight with people now. Haven't been able to get the deal we wanted. So I would vote Remain. I'd want to campaign for Remain as well.
Could you sign up to that declaration yourself?
Well, I think a lot of the sentiments in that declaration I've echoed already. But what Jeremy is doing, and this is the
question.
Yeah.
When is Jeremy Corbyn going to come out full throat and say, Remain, we're the party of Remain, vote Labour for Remain?
Okay. I've read all this rubbish about splits and all the rest of it, which is...
I'll come on to that.
Okay, we will, because... but where I've expressed a view, I've said, look, we need to express a view now, which is clearly, as I said, I will vote Remain. I want to campaign for Remain. And what Jeremy is rightfully doing, and this is one of the differences between us, I just say, let's get on with it. Jeremy is much wiser, actually. He says, let's talk to people, bring them together, build consensus, and then go for it. And that's what he's doing at the moment, and he's talking.
But you've almost run out of time,
well,
hasn't you?
That's the issue. No, that is the issue I've said to Jeremy, because if Boris does call a general election in September, we won't even have a conference to decide these matters. That's why we need to decide early and get on with it. And that's why he is talking to people now to bring them together.
Does now mean that we might get a clearer shift of position this week, do you think?
I think he's got further meetings with the trade unions over the next week. There'll be further discussions in Shadow Cabinet. Look at that timetable. I actually think he's doing the right thing. I think he must probably... everything about Jeremy is about building consensus. And I think on this issue, you need to bring people with you.
And yet things need to accelerate.
Yeah.
You described this as a slow-moving car crash. Perhaps it's too slow-moving.
You're quoting from a Shadow Cabinet that I won't comment on, but let me say this. I've said that we need to get to a position sooner rather than later, because I genuinely do believe, like you, that Boris Johnson will come in, he'll get a little bit of a bounce in the polls. He'll go for maybe a walk in the Welsh Hills like Theresa May, be overconfident, and then call a general election at the beginning of September.
We'll absolutely see. Meanwhile, you've got your own radical agenda out there. And I must ask you about a few things that have been announced recently. Splitting the Treasury and moving half of it to the north of England. Explain the thinking behind that and why it would actually change things in the real world.
For the past 3 years, I've been saying we've got to address the regional imbalances in terms of investment in our economy. That's been confirmed recently by the 2070 Commission by Bob Kerslake, who led that. It showed the dramatic lack of investment that there is in the north in comparison with London and the south east. Give you an example.
And you think taking policymakers out of London and putting them in Manchester will change things?
Right. Let me give you the example I was going to give you. First of all, transport investment, £344 per head in the north, £944 in London and the south east. That can't be right. So what I'm saying is we need to pour money into the north, investment long term on infrastructure, training, rebuilding the economy, but the better way to make decisions is to have them made in that locality, in the region. So I'm saying let's split number 11, take the National Transformation Fund where this resources will come from, take those decision makers and administrators and take them up north. I know everyone, I represent a London seat. I come from Liverpool, my family are up north. Everyone thinks I'm trying to get near to Anfield, by the way, on this one, but never mind. It's actually trying to say, locate the decision makers, administrators in the north, better decisions will be made.
Now, you mentioned the newspaper stories. Can I ask you directly, have you said to Jeremy Corbyn that he should sack Seamus Milne and Carrie Murphy?
I've not said to sack anybody. Look, it's July. What happens in July in Parliament? Journalists, the lobby, stagger from reception to reception, drinking some of the most nauseating wine that ever been produced from a grape. What then happens? They exaggerate and invent stories, and that's what's happened here.
But you've got a lot of whistleblowers from the heart of the Labour Party, at the top of the Labour Party, been talking to the BBC, they've been talking to journalists, and what they say has to be listened to. I mean, these are important people, some of whom feel excluded, some of whom feel bullied, and they need to be listened to.
Well, there's two issues there. In terms of the Sunday Times story about any splits between me and Jeremy, it's myth, it's rubbish.
Have you not been frozen out a bit from meetings?
Not at all. Look, you don't. Jeremy and I go back 40 years. We're the closest of friends. We've minded each other's backs all the way through that period, and we always will.
And you have full confidence in Seamus Milne and Carrie Murphy?
I have the confidence, and of course I do. I've not told anyone to be sacked or anything like that. This is all myth. But let's make it clear, Jeremy and I talk about policies on a daily basis. Yes, we'll disagree on things, but we'll then come to an agreement. He'll build consensus, just as he always does, and then we back each other up.
So you don't feel like Diane Abbott, apparently, that he's been held captive by his office?
That isn't, I don't believe that's what Diane Abbott has said anywhere, but let's make it absolutely clear. We're facing a general election in September. We're going to come to a decision, I think, sooner rather than later with regard to our Brexit position. We've got a huge domestic agenda that we want to promote, and I think we'll surprise people in the election just as we did in 2017, and we'll go into office as a united party.
Is it still your position to scrap non-disclosure agreements?
Yes.
So Labour Party people who have spoken to the press, have spoken to the BBC, have nothing to fear from the Labour Party about that?
What we've said, non-disclosure, look, in everyone's contract, you usually have a confidentiality clause, and of course that will continue on. And non-disclosure agreements, if they operate effectively, simply protect that. So if you're dealing with confidential data in particular, when you leave that company, you do not then inform others about it. I've always campaigned against non-disclosure agreements where they're trying to prevent whistleblowing, particularly around harassment and victimisation.
So, Labour whistleblowers who've blown the whistle on alleged anti-Semitism problems inside the party are now being pursued by the Labour Party with legal letters, and that seems hypocritical.
No, not at all. What's happening is the Labour Party is reminding them of their confidentiality agreement, because you can't have people, particularly when you're dealing with individual cases, individual information about individual members, that sort of thing. That can't be right. But what we'll be saying, we're going to reform the law so that whistleblowers will be protected, NDAs will not be used against them when they are using whistleblowers, and we will prevent...
Tom Watson says it's futile and stupid to be pursuing these people.
No, what they're trying to do is just remind them of their confidentiality agreements. But what we'll always protect is anyone who's subject to victimisation or harassment in that way, and that's why we want new whistleblowing legislation to protect them.
You've been down, as I said, at 18% in one poll recently, number 4 among the national parties. Are you really ready to fight an election in September?
24, 25% in the last couple of polls over the weekend, just above or neck and neck with the Tories. I think we are. I think once we get out there campaigning on our domestic policies in particular, just as we did in the last manifesto, where when we published the manifesto, we shot up 10 points in the polls. Wait till you see the next one. The same effect will happen.
What do you think is the right amount of money for an individual or a family to pass down to the next generation?
Right. This is about the proposals on the gift tax and all the rest of it. I've looked at those proposals. The thresholds that were brought forward by the IPPR and others, the land report that was published by George Monbiot for us, I think are too low. So we're consulting on that.
Too low. So the current threshold is, I think, 325,000.
Yeah.
So people will be able to give more.
What? No. In the report, in the reports, they were recommending 125,000. That threshold was too low, and so we'll consult about that.
Do you want to reduce the threshold? It's, I think, 325 at the moment.
That's right. Yeah, not looking to do that, but let's have a look at how inheritance tax works overall. We introduced some reforms in our last manifesto, closing a number of loopholes, and we'll look at that again.
Can you rule that out? Because it would be a massive tax change and it would affect lots of families in your own constituency and across the south who've got houses.
I think the idea of a gift tax throughout a gift relationship throughout the life of someone is a pretty good idea, but we've got to get the thresholds right so that ordinary people aren't penalised. That's what we'll do.
Now, you said another very interesting thing recently, which was that you were thinking of delisting companies that failed to meet their obligations on climate change. Without talking about climate change, about which we might agree, let's ask you, what does delisting actually mean?
I'm looking at the whole way in which the state can make sure that we tackle the existential threat. That's our number one priority. If we don't tackle that, we will not exist, full stop. And I don't want to be one of those politicians who leaves to our children this nightmare they face. So therefore, yes, we're going to large-scale investments so that we meet the net zero carbon by 2050, if not before. But we can't be in a situation where companies and government is doing all the right things, then you have other companies who literally are setting alight to the planet. So how do we do that? Regulation. And part of that has to be sanctions, and one of them is delisting.
So what does it mean? What does delisting actually mean?
It means they will not have access to our markets, as simple as that. Now,
so they're taken off the London Stock Exchange. Let's say an oil company is taken off the London Stock Exchange. It can still be listed in Frankfurt and New York and around the world.
Andrew, what's interesting, this debate is happening everywhere else as well. So other environmental standards are being introduced on other stock markets. That's why in a couple of weeks...
So it's part of a sort of global pressure.
And in a couple of weeks' time, I'm having this International Social Forum where we're looking at how we can jointly cooperate, not just on the European scale, but globally as well on these issues.
And you talk very vividly about setting the planet alight, but what would these standards actually be? So, for instance, BP is a big oil company which also invests a lot in solar energy.
How you can ensure that you get almost like a planning agreement with companies on a just transition, how they can work with us on moving from fossil fuel dependency into zero carbon. Now, that isn't something we need to do. It's desperately need to do. Otherwise, we won't have a planet. And do you know who's teaching us this? Our own children.
Are BP doing enough now? They're a highly controversial company at the moment. Would you delist them if you were in power
I think it's one of those companies that we've got to engage with, and that we've got to be firm with, and we've got to include regulation. And at the same time, yes, if necessary, take direct action in that way. I just said to you, the people who are teaching us this are our own children. If we don't start listening to them, I think we will be the generation that failed them.
A nice, easy question which you can answer in one word. Are you thinking of nationalising BT?
No. CWU as a union have been debating that, but we've set out our plans on what nationalisations that we're undertaking in terms of water, rail, Royal Mail and the energy for the grid.
Let's just go back to whistleblowing. Do you think whistleblowers should have legal protection now?
Yes, we've always said that. I campaign for legal protection.
And that would include Labour Party whistleblowers?
Of course it would, everybody. I took a petition to number 10 to that effect.
Let's look one last area of policy which is interesting people a lot. 51% of Britain's national wealth is in land, according to the latest survey, and that's a lot more than most developed countries. Is it time to change the taxation system to focus on land?
We've looked at this, And George Monbiot with a group of advisors produced a really good report. We're looking at that report now. What I'm interested in is how do we spread ownership of land? And one way of doing that is community land trusts. They're already being developed. I'd like to see the government working with local communities so that the land in their area passes to the control of the local community, and that must mean ownership as well.
The other thing that has absolutely ravaged the Labour Party for months and months and months now is, of course, the endless anti-Semitism row. Gordon Brown is talking about it again today, and he's saying more must be done. The Labour Party must properly apologise to the Jewish people in this country. Do you agree with him?
Well, Jeremy did. Jeremy did make an apology some months, ages ago, I think last year. So he made that apology.
Didn't seem to land
well. Well, if Gordon thinks it hasn't landed, let's do it again, and let's make sure we repeat it empathetically as well. I listened to Rabbi Jenna Klosner, and she talked on the Today programme, the Thought for Today, about how you go about securing an honest appraisal of what you've done, admitting it, and then seeking to how you repair the damage. That's what we're going through now. If it needs doing again, let's do it.
You kind of need to do something dramatic. I'm thinking of Willy Brandt going and kneeling down in the Warsaw ghetto. And there needs to be a kind of Willy Brandt moment, doesn't there?
Well, I've been to Auschwitz, as Jeremy has, and others as well. If there needs to be a symbol, fine, but it's not just about symbols, it's about practical action as well. And again, as I said, we have apologised. If that needs more, we should do. If there's more practical actions that come out of the HCR review, let's get those implemented quickly as well.
Are you absolutely 100% certain that Jeremy Corbyn will lead you into the next election?
Of course he will, and he'll win it as well.
All right, John McDonnell, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Almost out of time. Join us again next Sunday when I'll be talking to Sir Ed Davey about his campaign to lead the Liberal Democrats, and to the cricket legend Andrew Strauss. Until then, we leave you with Islay Canna Mason from her debut album. This is Scherzo No. 2 by Clara Schumann. Goodbye.
That was nice and refreshing for a Sunday morning. I think that's probably the only song I've bothered to actually listen to on the end of fucking Andrew Marr in a while. That's quite nice actually. Anyway, that's a lot for today, Sunday. Now I'm going to go and chill out, play some more Dark Souls 3, then watch the USA play Holland in the Women's World Cup, I think. Have a nice day, people. Have a nice day. Oh, and by the way, just on the point of the wages thing, actually, before I go, you'd be surprised if you got a large group of people with lots of money. That makes the small group who own the businesses even richer. But if the rich people don't pay the people at the bottom enough money to buy their shit, then the rich people stay rich, the poor people get angry, and then you have civil unrest. You should read the history book. It fucking helps. Ta-da.